is Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight from Washington, sending a message. The U.S. ramping up its pressure campaign on Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro by targeting now a third oil tanker, with President Trump about to announce plans for the next generation of U.S. Navy warships. We'll have a live report ahead. Also, special delivery. New details tonight on Nvidia's push to begin shipments to China, giving Beijing access to one of the world's most powerful AI chips. This as Google's parent company Alphabet makes its own power play today. Strategist Dan Ives is standing by to discuss. And going for Greenland, the White House latest play for the Arctic island that's creating new tension and angering a NATO ally in the process. But we begin tonight with President Trump set to make an announcement alongside Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the Secretary of the Navy just moments from now. For the details, we turn to the White House North Lawn, Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan. Kate, what do we have on store tonight in this announcement?
That's right. So we're expecting to hear from the president really at any moment now. And we're expecting this announcement to be specifically about shipbuilding. You know, there are reports that Trump is going to announce that the Navy is going to build a whole new class of warships and that it's going to be called the Trump-class battleship. So he's going to name it after himself. He's down at Mar-a-Lago. The president is there for the holidays. And as you mentioned, he's supposed to be joined by Pete Hegseth and the Secretary of the Navy. You know, this is really part of Trump's bid to revive U.S. shipbuilding and compete with China. But as I mentioned, the president is supposed to speak at any moment now, and hopefully he'll be answering some reporter questions and we'll learn more.
All right, Kate, it's been an interesting couple of days for the administration when it comes to Venezuela, bagging another oil tanker and pursuing a third tanker. Do we have any update on that third tanker and what the administration's saying about this effort?
Not at the moment, no. You know, this is definitely, we've seen the president really ramp up pressure when it comes to Venezuela and really ramp up these efforts. We've also seen these boat strikes. You know, there have been many people who have been killed. The administration says that they're targeting drug trafficking, and so we'll continue to stay tuned, but no updates there.
Okay, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan at the White House this evening. Today's shipbuilding announcement comes as the U.S. pursues, as I mentioned, a third tanker off the coast of Venezuela as part of what President Trump describes as a blockade aimed at cutting Venezuela's primary source of funding and raising new questions about the administration's goals in the region. For more, we're joined by retired U.S. Army four-star General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, also former Commander-Chief U.S. Southern Command. So he knows a thing or two about this part of the world, and it's great to see you again, General. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. As we pursue now a third oil tanker, is the U.S. acting within the bounds of the law, knowing that we had announced actual sanctions against these tankers before we started occupying them?
Yes, it seems we are acting within the bounds of the law. And but we shouldn't underestimate the difficulty of this. I mean, if you really tried to blockade the coastline of Venezuela, I know it looks like a postage stamp on a map, but when you actually get down there, it's a big place. And that coastline is it's as long or longer than the entire west coast of the United States. So it takes a lot of ships, a lot of aircraft. And in this case, the pictures we've seen of this tanker looks like it's fully loaded. So that's a big boy. It's carrying a lot of mass. You put a small ship in front of it to try to stop it. It won't stop quickly. It might run through a ship. So you're going to have to board it to get it stopped if it doesn't heed the signals.
Well, you know what the people are asking as we take a look at a map of the region and where these tankers are. By the way, the first one that we seized has made its way to Galveston, Texas. General, when you seize two ships and pursue a third, are you essentially declaring war on Venezuela?
I don't think it's a declaration of war. I think it is a means of putting economic pressure on. Now, when you put ground troops in, yeah, you really need to get some authorization from Congress for that because that's a campaign of indefinite duration once you put ground troops in. But this is a naval action to seize sanctioned ships. As far as we can tell, you're doing it with the Coast Guard resources. We've seized ships before. It's been done, and it's an easy way to put economic pressure on Maduro in Venezuela.
I'm curious your thoughts on what we heard from the Secretary of State, who held a very lengthy news conference partly on this, and the way he framed what he called a standoff in the Caribbean. Listen to Marco Rubio.
It is clear that the current status quo with the Venezuelan regime is intolerable for the United States. The status quo, that they operate and cooperate with terrorist organizations against the national interests of the United States. Not just cooperate, but partner with and participate in activities that threaten the national interests of the United States. So yes, our goal is to change that dynamic. And that's why the president's doing what he's doing.
But of course, General, to change that dynamic requires regime change, does it not? Is that what he's essentially saying?
He is essentially saying that, but, you know, Maduro doesn't have to have all that support from the Russians. He doesn't have to have a relationship with Cuba. He doesn't have to have a relationship with the Iranians. He chooses to do that. So if he wants to survive, can the leopard change its spots? That's the question. And if it doesn't, then I think the Secretary of State's made pretty clear that this is going to be a continually tightening noose on Maduro. I hope we don't go in on it with troops on the ground, though. I hate to see that kind of a fighting in a crowded area where there's a lot of weapons on the other side. This is not Panama of 1989. This is a much different setting. It could be that it could be easily done. You could perhaps snatch Maduro out or put him under pressure, have him renounce, have him disband his people and so forth in return for some kind of exile, maybe give him a little cash bonus to sweeten the pot a little bit, get him away. But if you have to go in on the ground and actually fight a bunch of people in Caracas and in the area where the port is and so forth, it's going to be destructive, probably going to take some losses, and it's certainly going to look like big, bad, ugly America again. I'd like to see us do more with the Organization of American States, with the other countries in South America. It can't be good for them what Maduro is doing. And we should be the good guys in this, not the bad guys. So we should be working with them and encouraging them to pressure Maduro to get out. He's caused so much hardship in the region to Colombia and Peru. He's forced out millions of people. They've distorted the labor markets in these countries. He's pushed migration in those countries that's been just as disruptive as in the United States, really. So they should have an interest.
What do you think our evolving justification for this blockade, as the president calls it, or shooting at alleged drug boats, says about us as good guys or bad guys? Because this started as an operation to stop the drug flow into the United States. That's why we were picking off these cigarette boats coming out of Venezuela. But recently, the president has not even mentioned drugs. He's been talking about oil. The fact that he says Venezuela illegally took our oil licenses and we're going to take them back. How does that change the framing of this potential conflict?
Well, it does change the framing of it. It makes us look a little bit like greedy Norte Americanos, to be honest with you. I mean, you know, the reason we talk about banana republics is because 100 years ago, when the banana plantations in Central America were nationalized, the United States went in there to retake those United Fruit banana plantations and give them back to the United Fruit Company. And so it left a lingering bad taste in Latin American countries. So, yes, there are some issues with oil, and they should be worked out. But we'd be on much stronger grounds if we went in legally through the Organization of American States, protesting a failed election, a non-democratic election, telling him he's got to get rid of the Russians and the Iranians out of there. There are other ways to leverage this than going after oil, and that's probably the worst way we could do it, because it looks like we're going to go snatch resources, and it's all about money. And if you heard the Secretary of State, it's not all about money. It's about U.S. national security.
We're going to be hearing from the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States in a moment, General, talking about the President's Golden Fleet, as he calls it, and a new class of warship. They're calling it the Trump class of warship, the FFX, with a first boat ready by 2028 to try to fill in shortfalls in our Navy. They're down at Mar-a-Lago, and the stage has been set for this announcement. Is this something that our Navy needs and can afford?
Well, the Navy has been the most neglected of the services, Joe. I mean, it is really short. It's retiring submarines, it's retiring warships that we didn't think needed to be retired, but we're having trouble manning. We're also having trouble shipbuilding. We can't get enough welders in some of these shipyards. And people don't want to work for what they're being paid for. It's nasty, dirty, hard work, and Americans have traditionally done that really well. But now we've let our civilian shipbuilding industry collapse in the United States. And because of budget constraints, and, you know, we went for a number of years without any new defense appropriation. We're just continuing resolutions on it. So we didn't get the money we needed to really build the fleet we need. So we're way behind China in the Western Pacific. So we're really short.
Doing a lot.
Ships, they've got to be large enough to stay at sea, and they've got to have enough on them to be able to handle the electronic warfare, the lasers, the cyber warfare, as well as anti-submarine and anti-air. So there's a heavy requirement on these ships. I think they're going to be loaded.
Could be quite a windfall for HII, the stock hitting an all-time high today, the shipbuilder. General, it's great to see you. Thank you for the insights, as always. Retired four-star General Wesley Clark, former Commander-Chief, U.S. Southern Command. Coming up on Balance of Power, President Trump raising the temperature on Greenland as well over his pick now for special envoy to the Arctic island. We'll have those details up ahead. But first, breaking news after the bell tonight, the big take reporting that Tesla engineers warned Elon Musk about issues with the EV maker's door handles. We'll have more on that. And Nvidia preparing to sell chips to China when we talk with Dan Ives. Straight ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us. Larry Ellison is throwing his personal fortune behind Paramount's bid for Warner Brothers, aiming to give his son's company an advantage in the fiercely contested takeover battle with Netflix. Both suitors moving today to strengthen the financial backing for their offers, as opposed to actually increasing their bids. The pre-market announcement driving the day, Warner Brothers and Paramount both moving on the news, with Netflix down about 1%, Paramount in the green. For all the details, we turn to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Another chapter in this saga, Nora.
Well, certainly another chapter as we continue to turn the page in this fallout between these companies, all fighting over Warner Brothers Discovery. You've got Paramount Skydance in focus today. We did see shares of Paramount Skydance ending up about 4.3% to end the day. But the biggest news that came out of this latest saga is the fact that Larry Ellison, which we know is one of the richest men in the world, he actually personally threw some of his money behind Paramount Skydance's bid to purchase Warner Brothers Discovery. So this is about a $40 billion guarantee, a personal guarantee that clearly adds a lot of excitement for investors in Paramount Skydance. We did see shares of Paramount Skydance up about 4.3%. Warner Brothers Discovery shares ending up about 3.5% higher. But Netflix still remains in focus. We do know that Warner Brothers Discovery was earlier urging a lot of its investors, saying, hey, we already have this deal going, this ongoing communication between Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery. Maybe we should continue on with them. But now that we've got this latest money coming in, money definitely talks here. We know that to be certain. We are still seeing a lot of activity in the market right now, Joe.
All right. Little revival in the AI trade today, Nora. Nvidia up about 1.5%. It helped to lift the whole neighborhood on this news from Reuters that it's preparing to ship H200 chips to China in February. I guess China's back on the menu?
Right. I mean, a lot of the conversation has been really focused about Nvidia and China and the chips there. And so that really, we do know that is a central part of where a lot of its revenue comes from in China. So there's been a lot of headlines that we've been following over the more recent months. But this really just underscores the demand that we are seeing in terms of artificial intelligence more broadly. This year, the focus really was tech, both this year and the previous year. So as I've been talking to a lot of my sources here on Wall Street, the question is how far this AI rally will continue to run, especially as we look ahead to 2026 and all the momentum that we've really been seeing coming from this sector in particular, Joe.
I have just the guy to ask in a moment. Nora, thank you. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda with us from World Headquarters in New York. The Chinese market does appear to be finally at hand for Nvidia. Indeed, reportedly telling Chinese clients that it plans to ship its second most powerful AI chips to China mid-February is the word. Nvidia planning to fulfill orders from existing stock, according to Reuters, with shipments expected of up to 80,000 H200 chips, which were approved for sale in China by the Trump administration just weeks ago. And joining us now with his reaction to this and a lot more today, it's been a busy one, Dan Ives, Global Head of Tech Research at Wedbush Securities. Dan, it's great to have you on the political show here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I don't know how I got so lucky, but I'd love for your take on this because we talk about export controls every day in Washington. You're on the other end of this, of course, looking at Nvidia's balance sheet and forecast, trying to figure out how to factor this in. How significant is this to crack back into the Chinese market?
Look, there's one chip in the world fueling the AI revolution, and that's Nvidia. And you really need to give them access to the China market. I think that's the understanding that's been well understood now in the Beltway. It's important because the reality is we're talking about $20 billion a year. And if they don't allow them to sell into China, that just gives Huawei and China competition the ability to narrow the gap. And that's what Jensen continues to talk. And I think that message is definitely being heard.
Is it possible for a Dan Ives to do channel checks when it comes to China? Do we know that there are buyers on the other end?
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously we spend a lot of time in Asia, in China. Look, they want NVIDIA chips. The reality is, would you want Peter Luger's steak or would you want White Castle? And the reality is they want the one chip in the world fueling the AI revolution. And that guy's wearing a black leather jacket, and his name is Jensen. And look, there's competition. Huawei and others, they're narrowing the gap. But big tech in China, there's one chip they want. It's NVIDIA.
Well, it's really interesting because Michael Burry, I think, is ready to meet you at White Castle. He was out once again with a knock on NVIDIA today, suggesting that energy efficiencies will make their highest power chips less useful in the immediate term. So as we throw all these data centers back together with an eye on Broadcom and its TPUs, is there some truth to this?
Look, I mean, our last Asia trip, if I go back a month ago, demand to supply is 12-1 for NVIDIA chips. So look, it's going to continue to be a prove me in terms of the AI revolution, but I mean, we still believe this is early days. You're talking about $3 to $4 trillion that's going to be spent next few years. There's others. Look, we're bullish on Google, bullish on AMD. Others are going to get into this AI arms race on the chip side. But right now, there's one chip at the top of that mountain, and it's NVIDIA's world, and everyone else is paying rent.
It's NVIDIA's world. Is this stock then, in your view, with the earnings growth, revenue growth that we've seen in the most recent forecast, is this stock cheaper than it was a year ago?
Yeah, I mean, like 250 to 275 is where I see it end of 2026. It's a cheap stock. And you know, I think it's one where investors sometimes, you know, there's a lot of noise in this, and you got to separate out what demand ultimately looks like. And we're in the third inning of a 9-inning game in terms of AI revolution. And it's not just about NVIDIA, it's about Microsoft. It's about Google. It's about Palantir. It's the, you know, the infrastructure, Nebius and others, GE Vernova. I mean, this is where it's all heading. You know, even when you look at things like nuclear, right, in terms of from a perspective, from an energy, it's just starting.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned energy because I talked about this today with Joseph Mycutt at CSIS, and he talks about energy with relation to AI. And we talked about this deal today, but also just the rampant growth in data center construction in this country and the potential for us to keep bumping into the ceiling, the capacity ceiling, when it comes to things like water and, yes, energy. Dan, here's what he said.
I think it's a little bit like a tale of two cities. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times.
Wow.
Looking back at 2025, it's been a remarkable year of continued acceleration. When we think about the build out that we expect to see over the next 5 years, that's going to continue to happen. All of the challenges that you raise, power availability, water use, a general sense that society's not getting the benefits of the data center build out, those are going to almost probably get worse.
Could get worse, Dan Ives. When you throw the NIMBY log on the fire, you consider the capacity constraints when it comes to cooling, yes, water, and also energy, whether or not we're all going to have a small nuclear reactor in our backyard at some point. What kind of volatility do investors need to brace for, knowing that this can't grow in a straight line?
Yeah, no, look, but I think for the first time in 30 years, the U.S. is ahead of China when it comes to technology. Energy is obviously the constraint. You saw the TAE nuclear deal. You see what's happening, in terms of what we see across all types of energy, not just nuclear, solar, and grid. But I think continuing nuclear is going to be the play. Look what GE Vernova is trying to do in terms of stopgap. Look, the reality is that is going to be the focus to make sure in this AI revolution that the U.S. is ahead. And I believe this is going to be a time of innovation. But no doubt, the biggest constraint in the AI revolution is energy.
Yep. Alphabet today agreeing to buy clean energy developer Intersect Power. I know that's not a big priority for the administration right now, Dan, but this is a $5 billion deal. To what extent will clean energy provide the next leg?
I think it's all about clean energy. I mean, we've talked about it. This is just the start of big tech owning more and more energy, and they're going to build it out vertically. I mean, that's the arms race that's playing out. You'll see OpenAI, you'll see other tech players, Microsoft and others, because that is where we're going in terms of from an energy perspective. And I continue to think you're going to see more deals like this. We've talked about nuclear and others. That's where I continue to think it heads.
Really interesting. Dan, I've got to ask you about the Tesla news while you're with us. Headlines on the terminal that Tesla engineers warned Elon Musk about the door handles, the electronic door handles, pushing him to consider making them purely mechanical for the Model 3 sedan in the name of safety. He pushed back because he valued the simplicity of push-button controls. How much of a liability is the story for the company?
I mean, look, in my view, Tesla, you have 10 million vehicles that'll be on the road by next year in terms of made. And I think the success speaks for itself. Look, I'm not saying that there's not issues, and these are all things that are very important, to sort of, understand and to make sure it's better and better. But I think right now for Tesla and for Musk, I mean, also the future is really about autonomous and robotics. And I think that's what investors are all focused on. And this is going to be a battleground stock. It will continue to be, but like we've talked about, we think $3 trillion in a bull case where we could see this, given the autonomous chapter is now here.
Fascinating, as always. With regard to autonomous, I've only got a minute left. Dan, what's the next stop on the road for Tesla? Most people have only seen reports of robotic cars, whether it's Waymo or Tesla's version on this. When does this go mainstream?
Oh, I think 2026. I mean, we've been cars in Austin, everything they're building out, the geofence area. I think you're going to have 30 cities with robotaxi, 2026.
Wow.
And this is going to be, I think, probably the most important year ever for Tesla, given true autonomous and robotaxis. And I think you're going to see more and more that are, in a robotaxi in the next year.
You at the point where you prefer a driverless car, Dan Ives?
I do. Look, I do. I mean, the point is that I think it's one. I've been in Waymos. I've been in robotaxis. I'm a big fan of full self-driving on Tesla.
I love that.
I think that's where this. If you have an 8-year-old today, they're not going to need a driver's license when they're 16.
Yeah. Incredible. I like that idea. I'll get in one of these, but if Dan Ives is with me, Global Head of Tech Research
do it
at
together.
Wedbush. Dan, great to see you. That's the plan. Thanks for being with us. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
The announcements of retirements from the House show that the House has not gotten done as much as they wanted to get done this year. Longest government shutdown, everything was jammed into one big, beautiful bill. Not much else got done legislatively. This is a bad sign about the workplace environment on Capitol Hill. At this end of year and going into the Christmas season, not a great time for House Republicans. And a bad time as politicians are reassessing whether or not to run again.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Patrick McHenry, their Bloomberg Politics contributor, former House Speaker Pro Tem, this morning, discussing what lawmakers were able to accomplish in 2025. Now that Congress is out of session until the new year, lawmakers are gone. Unresolved health care funding and the DOJ's release of the Epstein files loom over lawmakers' return in January, if any of them want to come back. Joining us now to break it all down for us, Bloomberg congressional reporter Stephen Dennis, who can't wait to get back. Great to see you. There are questions now about whether we're counting down to a shutdown or, in fact, a solution around health care would impact government funding at all. We have a funding deadline at the end of January.
Yeah, I do not expect another shutdown. I spoke to Chuck Schumer as he was leaving the Capitol for the break, and he said he had a deal with Thune to try to get the appropriations bills done. He has kind of looked at the ACA issue as in the rearview mirror. The deadline's going to be passing. People are going to be seeing those bills in a few days for January. Technically, there will be a vote in the House on the Democratic ACA bill because of that discharge petition. But, if that passes the House, John Thune has said it's dead on arrival in the Senate. Now, the real question is whether the moderates in both parties, who have been talking a lot about trying to come up with a compromise bill, can they find 60 votes for something, and will the president embrace it? So far, the president's sort of been the missing link here. If he were to say he wants some kind of extension, it would happen. Particularly one that didn't have, some big new abortion restrictions added to it, which a lot of Republicans want. So I think, the ACA is sort of out there as something that, seems like a long shot at this point.
So short of a deal to extend subsidies, do we go the whole year? We go straight through the midterms with premiums where they stand now? Because even Tony Fabrizio would tell you that could be worth a couple dozen seats in the House.
Yeah, I know. There's a big political risk here for Republicans. If you look at the reason why they're in the majority, there's about 5,000 votes in a handful of districts. If they had changed sides, they would have lost the majority. So this is a very closely divided House, even with all the redistricting that's going on. And, do we have 20 million people who in a few days are going to get lumps of coal in their stocking when it comes to health care? And suddenly they're facing an extra $1,000, in some cases many thousands of dollars in higher costs to them. So I do think this is something that's a lot of Republicans know that it's a hot potato, and they're going to be facing a lot of pressure all year long on it.
As far as avoiding a shutdown and funding the government, important over the weekend, the appropriations chairs in both chambers seem to have agreed on top lines. That's actual progress. I think we can report here from Washington. Will that resolve in a couple of minibus pieces of legislation that fund us through the end of the year?
Yeah, so the Senate Republicans have been working with Susan Collins, have been working on a 6-bill package, including health care and defense. They want to get all 9 bills that are remaining done by January 30th. They seem to have a glide path to get there. There have been fights back and forth over smaller pieces of these bills. But, I think that both sides really have an incentive to not have another shutdown. And so, Schumer, when he was leaving, said, I have this deal with Thune. I think that they can get it done, provided that there aren't huge new Trump factors. There's always something coming out of the White House. All it takes is something big for Democrats to potentially say, hey, we need to have something in this package to prevent Trump from doing that. And, we'll see.
Well, we'll call you back then. It's my last chance to walk out with Stephen Dennis in the calendar year. I hope you have a great holiday and Happy New Year to you. Stephen Dennis, thank you, as always. President Trump is nominating the governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, as his new special envoy to Greenland. You see this over the weekend, a post on social media. The president says Jeff understands how essential Greenland is to our national security and will strongly advance our country's interests for the safety, security, and survival of our allies and indeed the world. He writes the move comes after the president suggested that, he wanted to purchase Greenland back in March.
We need Greenland for national security and international security. So I think we'll go as far as we have to go. We need Greenland, and the world needs us to have Greenland. I think you may have JD going, actually. Yeah, I don't know if they've split that up, but Usha's great, but I understand JD might be gone.
Reaction from overseas today. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen responding to the president's announcement on social media, saying the EU stands in full solidarity with Denmark and the people of Greenland. Joining us now with her insights into the region, Jennifer Spence, Director of Arctic Initiatives at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. It's great to have you with us. If President Trump did actually manage to somehow gain Greenland, either by buying it or I guess through some sort of occupation, what would he have to gain when it comes to national security?
Well, it's a good question, Joe. I can't say that I see the connection between it being necessary to have a secure Greenland and needing to acquire Greenland. There's a lot of things that can be done to reach that sort of level of safety and security, both for Greenlanders and for the world and for the United States, without acquiring or annexing Greenland. That part's the question mark for me.
Well, of course, Greenland has provided resources to the U.S. in the past when it comes to the military in World War II, when it comes to the Cold War. Does it still serve that role?
Well, it's an interesting point. In fact, I mean, yeah, as you point out, the U.S. has had a presence in Greenland for military purposes for quite some time and was critical during the Cold War. But ultimately, when the Cold War ended, so did a lot of the interest in investing in infrastructure, military infrastructure in Greenland. In fact, we saw that sort of a real decline in investment because there wasn't the perceived risk. Now, of course, the equation is changing. We're seeing a change in the dynamics in the Arctic generally. But I don't know that you could argue that Greenland has resisted. In fact, they've been a full partner in the U.S.'s involvement and presence in Greenland specifically. There's been no resistance there. Throughout all the communications we've had with all of this, they've really been clear that this is not about not being ready to be an ally and a partner from a military perspective. So again, the sort of assumption that means that there needs to be an acquisition of the country is really the part that's concerning, I think, for a lot of people.
Seems like it's been a minute since we were sniffing around there. Remember, Donald Trump Jr. went for a visit. J.D. Vance, the vice president, was there back in March. Jennifer, here's what he said on his visit.
Our message to Denmark is very simple. You have not done a good job by the people of Greenland. You have underinvested in the people of Greenland, and you have underinvested in the security architecture of this incredible, beautiful landmass filled with incredible people. That has to change. And because it hasn't changed, this is why President Trump's policy in Greenland is what it is.
I have to be honest, Jennifer, I'm not sure what it is. Maybe you can describe President Trump's policy, unless it's one of annexation. But this is an interesting situation where you've got the vice president of the United States chastising a European nation for the way it's handling its own territory. How does that strike you?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of interesting points there. First of all, what we have seen both before J.D. Vance's visit, but also after is, I mean, and I have spoken to colleagues in Greenland who acknowledge that probably from a deterrence and domain awareness perspective, that there needed to be more investment. But that investment, the Kingdom of Denmark is investing more. The United States is investing more. So those investments are happening. But the other thing that is sort of lost in that is that at the end of the day, Greenland is a self-governing country under the Kingdom of Denmark. And starting in 2009 with a Self-Government Act, they're actually in transition to being independent from the Kingdom of Denmark on their own terms. So Greenland isn't asking to be saved by the United States right now. What it is communicating to the world is, you know, we are open to partner with people and we want to be part of a partnership, but we're not looking for a new we don't need to be colonized by another country. We've been through that.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the man who's got the job here as Special Envoy, Jeff Landry. I don't know if you know him, Republican governor of Louisiana. The president again said that Landry understands how essential Greenland is to our national security. Landry was out with a statement of his own shortly thereafter, saying that it's a volunteer job and that it in no way affects my position as governor of Louisiana. As a specialist in the Arctic, is there a door that Governor Landry can open for the U.S. in Copenhagen?
Well, I would argue that his tweets on X, or his X tweets, or however we say that these days, is not going to endear him to a lot of Greenlanders or to the Kingdom of Denmark, or we have seen internationally. If there's absolutely no concern, I don't think, with there being a special envoy identified by the United States, it's the mandate and the vision that he's coming with. And what he's clearly stating right off the get-go is he's not there to listen to the needs and interests of the people that live in Greenland, but is very much communicating a position that President Trump has said many, many times before. And so he's on that bandwagon, and that he's been very transparent about that. So I don't expect that he's going to get a very warm welcome. And hopefully he will listen. If he's ready to listen and learn, maybe there can be a productive relationship where they can, but at this point, the assumption is that the only way to get where everybody needs to go is by acquiring the country. I think it's going to be a pretty closed door.
Well, it's great to talk to you, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us. Jennifer Spence, Director of Arctic Initiatives at Harvard's Belfer Center. We appreciate that. President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, alongside the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Navy, has begun taking questions from reporters. This is the Golden Fleet announcement, what has resolved into a conversation about the Epstein files. At least that was the last question. Let's put an ear on this live on Bloomberg.
And there is tremendous backlash. It's an interesting question because a lot of people are very angry that pictures are being released of other people that really had nothing to do with Epstein, but they're in a picture with him because he was at a party, and you ruin the reputation of somebody. So a lot of people are very angry that this continues. A lot of Republicans are angry because of the fact that it's just used to deflect against a tremendous success. Look, we have $18 trillion coming into our country. We have, I believe, we're going to have the most successful economy in history. We inherited a mess. Now prices are coming way down. Gasoline is less than $2 in some states, $1.99, $1.97, $1.95 a gallon. $1.95. Think of that. A gallon. Nobody ever thought they'd see that. They don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about Epstein. And the problem is a lot of Democrats are being caught up in the web, like Larry Summers. Larry Summers was the head of Harvard. He's now been forced to resign from every board he's on. And board. Now he was at Epstein's Island a lot. I wasn't. I never went there, by the way. But fortunately, it's nice. But I never went there. But a lot of people did go there. But instead of talking about the battleships, or instead of talking about most favored nations drugs, we're bringing down drug prices like at a level that has never even been thought of, by thousands. Think of it, by 1,000%, by 1,200, 1,300, 1,400% in some cases. A drug that sells for $10 in London is costing $130 in New York. We're bringing it down to $20, and they're going to go up to 20. So they're going from 10 to 20, which is a doubling. It's a doubling. That's a lot, but it's a doubling. But we're going down to 20. So we're going down, if you can do your own math, but it's 2,000%, 3,000%. It's pretty amazing. And, the New York Times had a story about it, a small story way in the back of the paper. It's the single biggest thing to happen with respect to drugs probably in 50 years. There's never been anything like this. In my first term, I was able to get drug prices down 1/4%. It's the first time in 28 years that they went down. 1/4%. I was so proud of myself. Now we're doing them 2,000%, 1,500%, 1,200%. That pill that sold for 100.
President Trump speaking live at Mar-a-Lago. We wanted to put an ear on that for a moment as he steers reporters from questions about the Epstein files now to lower pharmaceutical prices. And we'll let you know if he makes any headlines on the terminal as he continues his conversation with the media. Coming up, fracturing within the MAGA movement. We'll discuss what recent departures of the Heritage Foundation could mean for the Republican Party. And we assembled our political panel. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Walkout at the Heritage Foundation over the weekend. More than a dozen staffers walking out in the latest sign of fracturing within the MAGA movement. Several senior leaders and staff left the organization to join Advancing American Freedom, a group founded by former Vice President Mike Pence, who told the Wall Street Journal he long admired the Heritage Foundation, but says the group is now abandoning its principles. Heritage most notably authored Project 2025, a policy playbook that has served as a roadmap for much of the Trump administration's first year. Joining us now, their reaction to this and the other stories we're following today, our political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital, alongside Democratic analyst Jeanne Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, I don't know your thoughts on this. The president of the United States had tried to distance himself from Heritage during the campaign, suggested that Project 2025 had nothing to do with his presidency. And now, of course, we're watching him pick through some of the highlights of that piece of literature here. To what extent does the Heritage Foundation speak for the contemporary Republican Party?
Yeah, I think the key point there that you make, Joe, is contemporary Republican Party. There had been a time during my period with Ronald Reagan where the Heritage Foundation spoke for that conservative movement. Movement conservatives, Reagan conservatives, the Heritage Foundation was the mouthpiece. Today, it's a mouthpiece of big government populism. And part of the controversy associated with this departure is statements that were construed as anti-Semitic. Coming from executives at the Heritage Foundation. So it has changed dramatically, fits better in the Donald Trump mode than the traditional Republican mode, and I think has severely damaged its brand, the way I would evaluate it. But at the end of the day, people vote with their feet, and it looks like a few of them are stampeding their way over to Vice President Pence's foundation.
Well, Jeanne, of course, Rick refers to a big argument that's taking place within the Republican Party that we saw play out, the Turning Point USA event over the course of the weekend. And it stems back to a Tucker Carlson interview with Nick Fuentes, which many people thought was unacceptable as part of the modern Republican Party. So there are questions about anti-Semitism, the role that Republicans should take against it, and racism broadly. I don't know if you heard J.D. Vance speak at Turning Point. He was on stage with all the pyrotechnics over the weekend to make this pronouncement. Listen.
In the United States of America, you don't have to apologize for being white anymore. We don't persecute you for being male, for being straight, for being gay, for being anything. The only thing that we demand is that you be a great American patriot.
Jeanne, what is the impact of language like this on the electorate?
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating. When Rick was describing that, I was thinking the same thing. We saw this echoed at Turning Point. You had people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Ben Shapiro on one side. You had the vice president sort of walking this fine line in the middle. And then you had the folks on the other side, represented by Nick Fuentes, who you mentioned, but maybe Tucker Carlson and some others. I think the vice president is trying to keep this coalition together. So we also heard from him some kind of dog whistles talking about Minneapolis as Mogadishu and attacks on Jasmine Crockett and other things. But he doesn't want to go too far one way or the other. I think that may be a problem for him. And one of the things that struck me was that Vivek Ramaswamy actually defended the second lady more forcefully from that stage than did her husband, J.D. Vance. So I think this is going to continue. And I think the question is, can J.D. Vance hold this coalition together, or is he going to be forced to take a side as we get closer to 2028?
Well, it's a pretty sensitive spot to be in here. Rick, I don't know who was apologizing for being white. That was a line that jumped off the page. But this could set up a really interesting dynamic going into 2028 with J.D. Vance, the standard bearer, endorsed by Erica Kirk and, of course, the folks at Turning Point, against somebody like Ted Cruz, who has been riding a hard line on anti-Semitism, saying it plays no role in this party.
Yeah, I think the emergence of the narrative that Ted Cruz is looking for a presidential run in 28 is a great juxtaposition to the infighting that's occurring within the MAGA coalition. And you've described that infighting, but what's really interesting is now serious politicians like Ted Cruz are looking at the landscape of 2028's presidential election and say, hey, there's plenty of room for me. These folks are going to cannibalize themselves. And he may be right. I think that this Turning Point conference, the America Fest, could be seen as the first shot of the beginnings of the 2028 presidential election. Certainly the endorsement of J.D. Vance has done that. And it's also a message to people like Ted Cruz that you can't wait till later. There's no such thing as waking up after the midterm elections, taking a poll and seeing whether or not you got a run in you for president. Presidential campaign started this weekend.
Wow. How about that, Jeanne? Do you see this the same way? It wouldn't be Ted Cruz's first foray into presidential politics, but boy, it's early. And this could represent a major fracture in the Republican Party in the primary cycle. What do you think?
It could. I'm thinking about a recent poll which showed J.D. Vance at like about 22% support, which is not horrible. I mean, 3.5 years out or 3 years out, really. But about 66% of those folks said they had no particular person in mind to support. So there is room. And of course, let's face it, historically, vice presidents who are looking for a third term of their president, if that's what J.D. Vance ends up doing, hugging Donald Trump, they haven't been incredibly successful. So I think we're going to see a challenge. I don't know if it's going to be Ted Cruz. It's awfully early. Again, I'll mention Vivek Ramaswamy. Imagine he wins for governor. Does he jump out as a challenger? There's a lot of folks out there who could get into challenge. And Mike Pence, who could get into challenge somebody like J.D. Vance.
Did Ted Cruz put this blood in the water, Rick? How did we get to be talking about this already?
Look, there's a lot of reporting around the fact that Ted Cruz has been talking to folks, who have intimate knowledge of the process of running presidential campaigns. Yeah. As Jeanne mentioned, he's run it before. He knows the game. He ran a very credible campaign the last time. Didn't last very long. He couldn't get a positioning on Iowa that he wanted to be able to sustain the bid, but he's learned a lot. And by the way, the lesson of politics over the last 50 years has been you got to run and lose once to really have the advantage of running again, because there's a lot to learn as a candidate, not just as a campaign. Mm-hmm. So, I think, and by the way, we had a dozen people in that race. So every one of those dozen still probably wake up every morning thinking, I could be president of the United States.
Great panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, we thank you both for the insights on the Monday edition here of Balance of Power. I want to mention a breaking headline that just crossed the terminal. This will be a big mover tomorrow. Novo Nordisk says its Wegovy pill has been approved in the U.S. as an oral GLP-1. The pill. Novo shares right now are skyrocketing, up over 5% in after-hours trading. We saw a little blip in Lilly shares, but holding positive as well. Much more on this tomorrow, right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.